We have been going through the book of Matthew for, I think, a little over 3 years now. We are tenacious in our desire to go through the Bible verse by verse because we think it's a great way to understand the full meaning of what God has for us. And we are now in the last part of Matthew's gospel, Matthew chapter 26, which is commonly called the Passion narrative, which really focuses around Jesus' Last Supper with his disciples, his arrest and trial and crucifixion, then his resurrection and his commission of the church. So we're going to be tackling that, the first couple verses in Matthew chapter 26 today. And it's interesting, the way that Matthew sets up the Passion narrative is he does talk about sort of the leading up to Jesus' death, but it's couched around this symbolic act that takes place. And we're going to read about today where a woman comes and she pours all this perfume over Jesus' head. Some of you who kind of check us out on social media might have seen the sermon title, Smelly Worship. I had someone come to me and was like, Andrew, I think you made a mistake on the sign. We put it out on our cafe, and they're like, I don't think this is what you want to say. I'm like, no, it's actually what I want to say. Come in, and you'll hear why. Because I think what we're going to see today is that we're going to see several different responses to who Jesus is, and I think at the center of it is this picture of worship, and what it's going to do is actually help us understand that each of the responses is actually governed by worship. So before I dive into the text, I just want to unpack for you this idea. James K. Smith, he's a philosopher, theologian. He wrote this fantastic little book called You Are What You Love. And within that book, he makes the claim that we are not primarily thinking creatures. The way that we act isn't primarily this cerebral exercise where we think it and then we do it. We're fundamentally loving creatures. We act upon our passions, our desires, our loves. He goes on and says this, our wants and longings and desires are at the core of our identity, the wellspring from which our actions and behaviors flow. And then later in the chapter, he says, the great reformer Martin Luther once said, whatever your heart clings to and confides in, that is really your God. We become what we worship because what we worship, we love. As we've seen, it's not a question of whether you worship, but what you worship. Which is why John Calvin, who's another reformer, refers to the heart as an idol factory. We can't not worship because we can't not love something as ultimate. Jesus' call to us today is going to be a call to evaluate how our response to him reflects what we truly love and what we truly worship. So let's open our Bibles. If you have a Bible, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 26. If you don't have a Bible, we have a couple over there. Our free gift to you. Of course, you can always download one on the App Store on your phone for free. And we're going to start right away in verse 1, and I'm going to read all the way through to verse 16. So it says this, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, as you know, the Passover is in 2 days, or is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. So Jesus just finished this long series of speeches, first critiquing. He's kind of gone into a series of critiques and arguments with the religious leaders. He goes on to critique them to the people, goes on to answer a couple of questions from his disciples about when the temple's going to be destroyed and what is the sign of the end of the age. He tells a series of parables about how they're to be prepared for his eventual return. But now Matthew's switching gears for us, and he wants us to understand that this is now the point where we're headed to the cross. So he starts off by telling us that Jesus had finished all these things as a means of transition, but then Jesus opens up with this new train of thought. And he says, as you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified. Matthew wants us to understand, even right here at the beginning, that Jesus is not taken aback. He's not taken by surprise by the cross, that he is fully prepared and moving towards it as a willing participant. Goes on in verse 3 and says, then the chief priests and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas, and they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. While Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. "Why this waste?" they asked. "This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor." Aware of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. When she poured this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" So they counted out 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. We have this epic kind of story of this woman doing this very excessive, almost extravagant act over Jesus. And it's bookended by these sort of stories of people who kind of plot against Jesus, plot to end his life. And I think what we see in this is three very different responses to Jesus. On one hand, we see in the religious leaders at the beginning, the chief priests and the elders, a sense that they despise Jesus. In the middle, we have this woman who shows that she is devoted to Jesus. And then we have this story of Judas. And it seems that Judas is disillusioned with Jesus. So let's look at the first example, the chief priests. The chief priests, they gather together and they decide that they want to end Jesus. Why is this? Well, if you've been following along with us over the past several kind of months as we've unpacked Jesus' continual confrontation with the religious leaders, what you'll notice is that Jesus has done something very particular. He's critiqued them, but he's also exposed them. As they've come into a series of conflicts with Jesus, he's exposed that they are not as good as they think they are. They're not as in control as they think they are. He continually critiques their righteousness, the things that they're looking to say, like, I'm a good person. I'm the one who should be giving moral advice to everyone else. And he's a threat to their control, this fine balance that they've had with the Roman authorities. Now, as I said at the beginning, I think this is ultimately three responses that stem from worship, and it might not be on the surface immediately identifiable, but if what the Bible says is true, that we are fundamentally creatures that were created to worship God, and yet we sinned, and now we find other things to invest that worship in. And if James K. Smith is right, that we are fundamentally worshiping creatures, that our actions stem from not what we think, but what we love, then I think the actions of the chief priests show something about what they love. There's this, I think, understanding in religious cultures that when you have a God, that God has sort of like sacred space or sacred, like a zone that's like, this is sacred. Well, I'll use that word. For example, if you studied Islam before, you know that in Islam there are a couple of really central cities. And two of the most important are Mecca and Medina. They actually have a rule. They believe that those cities are so sacred that if you're not a Muslim, that you cannot enter there. There's a sense of the sacred. And even we look throughout the Bible, when the Jewish people made the temple, there was the Holy of Holies, the place that was reserved for God. And if you wanted to enter his presence, it needed to be done a particular way. And if you didn't do it in that particular way, often the result was death. See, when we worship something, when we have something that we lift up as supreme, with that comes this expectation that that thing must not be desecrated. It must be maintained. And what has Jesus been doing? The things that the religious leaders have been looking to, he's desecrating them left, right, and center. And like an infidel who's found in Mecca, Medina, the response that the Jewish religious leaders have is, he's got to die. We can't tolerate him exposing our idols, the things that we're worshiping. We must do away with him. Most of us aren't Jewish, none of us really are not first century Jewish religious leaders. And so you may be asking yourself, well, what does this have to do with me? Okay, so these guys, obviously Jesus, he heckled them, he put them on the spot, he constantly critiqued them, he exposed them. They wanted to kill him. That's not me. But really the response that they had was one that started off with despising Jesus. They despised him. They didn't want to have anything to do with him. They wanted to be rid of him. And I think some of us might actually be in a space where we despise Jesus. And we typically think of people who despise Jesus as people who are kind of outside the church, people out there, people in the world who look to other things, who look to no religion, who try and manufacture something for themselves. And yet I think it's possible that there are some here who are watching or sitting in this room, and you're here, and you don't really want to have anything to do with Jesus. Maybe you got dragged here by your parents or your kids or your spouse, or some friend bullied you into showing up. And you think in your head, like, this Jesus stuff it's dumb. And when you have the chance, you critique it, you talk about it in the negative, because you don't really want to have anything to do with Jesus. Why is that? Because the reality is if you acknowledge Jesus, it transforms and changes your life, and the things that you have been looking to for your satisfaction, your hope, they're going to be exposed as things that can never accomplish what you hope they will accomplish. If your ultimate God is something like security or wealth or political power, or any of the things that the religious leaders look to, or even the things that much of our culture lifts up, autonomy, self-actualization. When Jesus comes, he desecrates those gods because his essential message is, you are not enough. You cannot do this on your own. This thing will not satisfy you. You will never have enough money to be completely secure. You will never have enough power to be able to control everything. You'll never find enough love from other people to fill that void that you feel inside of you. You'll never be able to construct an identity for yourself that makes you feel whole. And all those things, they become ultimate things. They become the things that we love and we long for. And Jesus comes and he desecrates that, and he demands a response. And the response can either be one where we say, we've been worshiping the wrong things and we're going to start to worship Jesus, or it becomes a response in which we say, no, you're exposing this. You have desecrated our sacred space, and we need to push you away. We need to be done with you. We need to kill you. It's interesting. There's kind of two pathways that we try and construct ultimate meaning, trying to reach the thing that we worship outside of Jesus. And they may seem like opposite pathways on the surface, but they're actually, like most things, when you get kind of far enough to either ends, they kind of meet. The first is what I call moralism, and this is what we see a lot in the Jewish religious establishment. It's this picture that me, in my own strength, by my own power, by my own means, can construct for myself the perfect reality if I do all the right things. And you don't necessarily have to be a Christian to do this. All religions really function in this framework, right? How do you reach nirvana if you work really hard, do all these things? How do you reach, your 40 virgins if you're really good? You kind of go through all the different world religions. How do you get to the celestial kingdom if you're a Mormon? Then you got to do this, and this. Moralism, you don't even have to be religious for. I mean, our culture in this day and age is a very religious culture. How do you become a good person? You hit all the right hashtags. You don't do blackface. We have a whole set of things that you have to do or not do to be a good person, to be an ultimate person in our culture. And Jesus comes and challenges that and says, you are never going to be good enough on your own to reach the space that you get to get to that thing that you really want. Because ultimately, behind moralism isn't God. It's this other thing that we hope for. It's this other thing that we worship. You look at kind of moralistic cultures within Christianity, say like the prosperity gospel. How does that work? If I do all the right things, so if I'm a good person, give money to like the pastor, all this kind of stuff, then God is obligated to give me what I really want. So what I want isn't God. What I want is what he can give me: wealth, health, and happiness. Those are my idols. And Jesus comes and says, those things can't fulfill you. Those are not the real reason. And besides, you can never reach perfection without me. On this flip side, we have what I would call relativism. And this is pretty common as well in our culture. It's the idea that rather than having to follow sort of a moral ladder that you reach kind of up step by step, it's this idea that you kind of pick and choose. You build for yourself your own reality. So I like this part of Christianity. I like Jesus, who kind of says, like, feed the poor, do good to others. Okay, I can take that part. And I really like, mindfulness from Buddhism. So I'm going to take that. And I really like, justice and equity and stuff. So I'm going to borrow from our culture this, and this. And we create for ourselves, we construct for ourselves this thing that's supposed to give us ultimate identity and ultimate meaning. And again, Jesus comes and says, you cannot reach what you need to reach on your own. Both moralism and relativism are actually rejections of our need for Jesus. They both have this claim that we can reach the ultimate thing in and of our own efforts. And they stem from a false sense of worship. And when Jesus comes in and confronts that, he demands a response. And the response is either going to be that we look and we say, man, we can't do this on our own. We can't reach what we need to reach. The thing that we're looking to for ultimate satisfaction, the thing that we're placing our love in, our hope in, that can't satisfy me, and I need to worship Jesus. Or we'll say, Jesus, you're messing with what I got going on here, and I need to be rid of you. And so we despise him, and we try and kill him. Interestingly enough, we see in the response of Judas almost the exact same trajectory, but it's a very different start. I was talking to my in-laws. They've been watching The Chosen. Is there any fans of The Chosen here? A few? Yeah. I haven't watched it. I've heard it's really, really good. Chris is like, Chris and me are similar in that we like kind of mock kind of Christian things a lot of the time, like Christian media. I'm sorry if you're like a huge fan of Christian media. Confessions with Andrew right now. And he's like, Chosen's really good. So I'm going to hopefully be able to watch at some point. I heard that in one of the last episodes that they introduced Judas, and my in-laws were talking about this, and that he, you don't really see right off the bat this guy who's going to go and betray Jesus. And it's interesting, as we look at the life of Judas in the gospel, we don't know a ton about him. He's not like a super prominent figure, but what we do see is this person who has journeyed with Jesus. He's one of his 12 disciples. And you think about all the things the disciples did. I mean, Judas sat there as Jesus taught the Sermon on the Mount. Judas was sent out to go and proclaim the gospel, to cast out demons, to heal people. He was around for all the incredible things that Jesus does. Jesus invested in him, cared for him. He was in intimate relationship and contact with him. And in verse 14, one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" And it says they counted out 30 pieces of silver. We don't know a ton about Judas, but we have to ask, how do you go from this intimate, connected relationship with Jesus Like, what happened? What flipped in your head that suddenly you go and betray him? We know from John's gospel that Judas was the chief person who was angry about this woman pouring the perfume over. And John tells us that Judas was actually pilfering. He was the keeper of the kind of the communal funds, and he was actually pilfering money for himself. So we know that there was some sense that he had put his hope and his desire was around money. Also, his name, Judas Iscariot, scholars are a little bit unsure, but many think that it actually refers to a previous life that he had as a Sicario, which is like a Jewish assassin. So maybe he was a zealot, a freedom fighter. Whatever it is, we can see that Judas had this idea of what Jesus was supposed to accomplish for him or give to him or produce. And maybe it was just that he thought, man, if I hang myself to this guy's coattails, it means I'm going to be able to get wealthy. And maybe he was super poor, and he just thought, this is my way out. And then here goes Jesus, like just wasting something. Or maybe, as many people believe, Judas had these political hopes. Jesus was supposed to be the one who was going to overthrow Rome. And what does Jesus do? He predicts his death. He has someone pour perfume over him as a burial rite. And you said, you know what? Jesus, you're not the guy I thought you were. And he becomes disillusioned with him. And the crazy, ironic thing about this reality is that Judas sells Jesus out for what is like a month's wages, 30 pieces of silver, or 30 denarii. He's been journeying with the only person who can actually transform his life, and he sells him out for pittance, which will never be able to transform him. Now, again, Judas is a unique person in a unique story, but I think many of us may be able to relate because many of us have a constructed image of who Jesus is supposed to be or what he's supposed to do for us. But what happens when we're confronted with the real Jesus? The one who doesn't seek power for himself through might, but lays down his life. The one who doesn't seek wealth or comfort, but goes and suffers the cross. I think some of us might be disillusioned with Jesus. Let me just pose a couple of questions to help us understand or reflect on whether this is where our heart is at. Are you frustrated or angry with Jesus because you expected that he would do something for you that he hasn't? Maybe it's a job, a family that you anticipated that you would have. Maybe you're single and you thought, I should be married. Maybe it's wanting to have a baby and it hasn't happened yet. Maybe you're at a state where you're going through dead-end jobs and you're just like, I thought I was supposed to be further ahead in life right now. And you're looking and you're saying, like, Jesus, we had a deal. You were supposed to be the person to help me get to these places. Why am I here? There's really only there's only a couple places that disillusionment can lead to. Disillusionment will either lead to us questioning the construction that we had for Jesus and recognizing that what we thought about him was wrong and repenting, or we're going to move into that space of despising him and we're going to want to have nothing to do with him. You know, we've come out of or we're in the middle of a pretty contentious COVID reality. And in this space, I've actually seen a lot of disillusionment come to the surface. And I've seen people respond to that disillusionment in a couple of different ways. The first way I've seen is what I call deconstruction. There's been a lot of people, and they're looking around, they're saying like, oh, the church isn't handling things the way that I think they should, or Jesus isn't working the way I think he should, or, and so you're disillusioned with Jesus, with his people, with whatever, and you start to like pull apart your faith. And don't get me wrong, there's actually a lot of good things that can come out of deconstruction. You see, sometimes we have to deconstruct. The apostles, the followers of Jesus, they had to construct the wrong image of Jesus that they had and build it on the reality. And that happened as they encountered the risen Jesus and recognized what he was actually all about. When we become disillusioned, we actually do have a calling to deconstruct the false picture of Jesus that we have in our mind. But sometimes, and a lot of the times, what we do is we encounter the real Jesus. We don't like him. We don't like what he's calling us to. And so we deconstruct, and then we reconstructed Jesus in our own making, in our own liking, that doesn't actually cause us to question who we're worshiping. Again, if this is all about worship, what we see is that Judas had something else besides Jesus that he was worshiping. It may have been closeted, it may have been underneath the surface, but it eventually came out. And it came out because he encountered the real Jesus. And a lot of times what happens in deconstruction is not that we deconstruct the false thing, the false picture of Jesus, so that we can expose the thing that we're actually worshiping and repent and start to worship Jesus, but we actually deconstruct the real Jesus so that we can build a Jesus that actually reflects the thing that we're worshiping. One of the ways that this has happened, interestingly enough, is in our Christian reality, is what I call the uptick of Christian nationalism. So many of our values and the things that we hold to have become ultimate for us. And don't get me wrong, it's not wrong to say we want to have a society that's filled with good Christian values. But this is not the ultimate thing. It's possible to elevate morality, values over the actual person of Jesus. And we see that in the way that we respond. The way that we respond when we uphold our values and we try and meld them with politics and culture becomes this militant thing. And we see things that happen like the Capitol storming in the U.S. in the name of Christ. That's not a picture of what Jesus is like. And it comes when we actually encounter the real Jesus who laid down his life sacrificially, and we think, yeah, that's not working for me. I want the political Jesus. I want the Jesus who's going to go and overthrow Rome. And if you're not that Jesus, I'm going to find one who is. So we have those who dismiss Jesus, those who are disillusioned with Jesus, which eventually will lead to them also becoming those who dismiss Jesus. But finally, we have this picture of this woman who's devoted to Jesus. So verse 6, while Jesus was in Bethany, in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured out on his head as he was reclining at the table. So this woman comes in, and this act is bizarre. She takes this very expensive bottle of perfume. I think Mark or John tell us that it was worth a year's wages. So just think about this for a second. What's a living wage in Victoria? Like a living family wage or average family income, something like that. Maybe $100,000 a year, maybe slightly less than that. But let's say $100,000 for sake of illustration. This woman comes in and she dumps $100,000 worth of perfume over Jesus' head. And just imagine if you were in that room. Like, you're sitting there and it's just overwhelmed by that smell. Like, you can't escape it. It's drawing all that attention right to Jesus. It's extravagant. But it's not only extravagant, it's sacrificial. John tells us that this woman was Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, likely not a very wealthy woman. And a lot of times in that day and age, to have sort of a savings plan, you would invest it in tangible items. And so this was likely a family heirloom, a family wealth. Mark actually says that this woman gave what she had, meaning she gave what she was able to give, everything. She essentially dumped her inheritance all over Jesus. It was extravagant. It was sacrificial. And the people are sitting there and they're thinking, why would you do this? And the disciples, they even go on to say, why the waste? This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Like Jesus, think of all the good that could happen if we just sold this and gave the proceeds to the poor. Why this extravagant act? R.T. France, he's a scholar, he notes this. He says, the woman's extravagant loyalty offsets the shameful horror of crucifixion. That is why it must always be remembered, not simply as a model of uncalculating devotion, though it is certainly that, but as an affirmation of the value of his death from the point of view of faith. What France is saying is this isn't an arbitrary action, it's a responsive action. Jesus, at the beginning of the gospel, of this account, says, I'm going to be crucified. His disciples heard it. This woman probably heard it. And Jesus even affirms that this is an action surrounding this reality, that she did it to prepare him for burial. But how is Jesus going to die? He's going to die as a common criminal on a cross. He's going to die in such an insignificant way. But he's God. Just think about some of the important figures and how their death is marked. When I was a kid, I remember Princess Diana passing away. And she had this massive funeral, and people from all over the world came, and I'm sure they spent millions and maybe billions, probably not billions, but millions of dollars to just celebrate her life and mark her passing. And how much greater, how much more significant is Jesus? God in human flesh. But he dies on the cross. He's remembered by peasants. But his act is not insignificant. His death is not insignificant. His death is the thing that marks our salvation. His death is on our behalf. His death is the reason that we are to worship him. And this woman gets it. She gets that it's significant. And her response is proportional to her understanding of what Jesus has done for her, or is about to do for her. And it's not just something that she has as this personal expression of worship for Jesus. It's done in such a way that it's telling everyone else around her about the significance of her love, devotion, and worship to Jesus. It's smelly worship. Everyone in the room is going to know that she thinks Jesus is worth her everything. This is really important. Jesus tells the disciples when they say, hey, we could have given this money to the poor. He says, what this woman, don't bother this woman. Verse 10, don't bother this woman. She has done a beautiful thing to me. And he goes on to say, the poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. Jesus here isn't saying the poor don't matter. I mean, we know that, right? We know from the rest of the Bible, the rest of the New Testament, the way the apostles kind of take the message of Jesus, that it always has ramifications for justice, for the oppressed and the poor. But what Jesus wants us to understand is that this singular moment of him going to the cross is more important. It's more significant. And I think the ultimate thing that he says here He says, truly I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the whole world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. It's funny, Matthew doesn't even think that her name is necessary to communicate to us. John tells us that's Mary. Matthew, he doesn't even think that that's important. What he thinks is important for us to get is what she's done. Why is that? Because what she has done is responded to the work that Jesus is about to do for her on the cross. And I think what Jesus wants us to understand here is that we can't actually do a good job of feeding the poor unless we first go to the cross. The poor will always be with us because we on our own can never, ever, ever fix the problem. There's only one person who can, the one who returned to make a new heavens and a new earth. And if we miss this, then we miss everything. And so this is what we're called to. We're called to encounter the real Jesus, to understand what he's done for us, to know that he has gone on the cross and paid for our sins, and that demands a particular response. It demands this response of devotion, a devotion that is demonstrated through excessive sacrificial worship. This week, if I sound a little incoherent, more incoherent than usual today, it's probably because I feel a little bit more incoherent. My kids have been struggling a little bit with colds, and don't worry, they don't have COVID. We got them tested, but they've been up a lot, and I've been tired, and so I've been struggling with this passage. And as I've been thinking through this question, I've asked myself, does the way that I worship Jesus, does it actually tell people about how significant he is and how significant his death is? Like this woman, she had this very physical act where she poured out her life savings upon Jesus' head, and it just everyone was going to know, because the scent of it even was drawing people into this. Does the way that I worship Jesus, does it actually give people a sense of how significant he is? Does it tell people that my whole life needs to be poured out for him? I think of so often when we see examples of excessive worship, and we're kind of like the disciples, and we think, that's too much. Even, thinking something as simple as, and I hope if nothing else you get from this, that worship is far more than singing. But even just think about singing. Does the way that we worship Jesus through song, does it demonstrate how crazy we are about what he's done for us? Would someone be able to come in the room and look around and be like, oh man, these people are super excited that Jesus went to the cross for them, that he died? They get it. They're enraptured by it. Or when someone comes and they say Mom and Dad, I want to take a year off and go to on a mission trip, so I'm going to work and then I'm going to spend all that money. And you're kind of that's cool, but maybe you should just spend it on school. School's really expensive. It seems a bit excessive. And you kind of poo-poo it. But shouldn't there be more of that? Shouldn't there be more people in the church who sell everything because of Jesus? Because they're so excited about what he's done? Shouldn't there be more people who uproot their lives and move to some city or town where they don't know anyone and build a house so that those people can know Jesus because they're so excited about what he's done for them? So as I finish off here, I just want to ask a couple of questions. I just want to ask, what does your actions say about your worship of Jesus? Do they offer something that's a smelly form of worship, something that people look around you and they can't help but notice that you're so excited about Jesus, Like they just smell it in the air? Here's another question. Are you more excited about doing good things or philanthropy than you actually are about the gospel? Is it easier for you to just do good things than it is to actually talk about the good thing, the best thing that Jesus has done? Think about the other responses to Jesus. Perhaps a question that we need to reflect on is, are you questioning Jesus' goodness because he hasn't met your expectations? The invitation for that is to go back and ask, what am I actually worshiping? Jesus in his grace actually allows us to go through periods of disillusionment so he can expose the false worship in us so that he can actually get rid of it and bring us to a point of devotion to him. The final thing I'll just add here before I close off and invite the band up is, do your actions demonstrate an attitude of self-sufficiency, self-indulgence, or a fixation on self-actualization? Another way to put that is there actually room for Jesus in your life? Maybe you're here and you've been part of church, but underneath the surface, you really despise Jesus. His invitation for you is to see the things that you're worshiping that are not him, and to rather than try and put him to death, put those things to death so you can find your ultimate hope and satisfaction, not in your own pride or your own works, but in his.